the perfection of love, harmony and beauty, boldly being united with all the illuminated souls who form the embodiment of the Master, the Spirit of guidance.
Something very mysterious happened to Hazrat Pir-o-Murshid Inayat Khan in Katwijk in September 1922. The outer life of a mystic is a miracle in itself, but here, the veil that covered the secret inner life of a great mystic parted briefly. In the story of what happened here, we get a rare glimpse into something of great significance. We know of it only from what was left behind, an enduring blessing. This place holds the impression of a great event, and this is the story told by those who were there. In 1922, Hazrat Inayat Khan was invited to hold a summer school in the small fishing village of Katwijk aan Zee. His hosts were Sirdar and Saida van Toyle, who had recently been married and had bought a home in Katwijk. Among the disciples gathered there was Murshida Sophia Saintbury Green, who recorded the Katwijk story in her book, Images of Inayat. During his stay in Katwijk, Inayat Khan enjoyed walking on the beach, where the waves and the wind spoke deeply to his mystical spirit. He had written the nature meditations a year earlier. As he watched the waves and the blowing sands, he may have felt something like the sentiments expressed in these phrases from the nature meditations. My head bends in humility and rises with thy might, as the ever-rising waves of the sea. The waves of joy rise in my heart when I see thy nature manifest in the sea. Thou art the ocean, and I am the wave. In the touch of the air, I feel thy sympathetic caress. I rise above birth and death through the waves of the air. In the summer school, the subject of his daily talks was the inner life. By the end of the year, these talks had been published as a book. The atmosphere of the school was peaceful and uplifted. One day, however, Inayat Khan's usual majestic and peaceful demeanor was suddenly interrupted by a mysterious passion. We have no pictures of Inayat Khan that might suggest such a state, so you will have to use your imagination with these pictures to conjure up images described by Murshida Saintbury Green.
At breakfast he was restless and didn't touch his food. Through the morning he seemed distant and distracted. He spoke but didn't finish his sentences. At lunch again he didn't eat. He asked his host Serdar and his disciple Murshida Sophia to accompany him on a walk. Normally his walk was slow and kingly. On this occasion he walked so fast his companions could barely keep up with him. Their path took them inland away from the beaches and toward the dunes that line the coast. When they reached the dunes, Inayat Khan turned and spoke in a commanding voice. He told them to wait there until he returned. Then he strode off into the dunes like an ancient prophet, his hair flying in the wind. Independently, his companions both thought of the prophet Elijah.
No one knows what he experienced during the 45 minutes he spent walking in the dunes, shielded from the winds. The path he walked has been preserved as a shrine. Can you imagine walking in his footsteps, following him to a sacred rendezvous?
When he returned to his companions, his manner was once again serene and gracious. He carried flowers he had found in the dunes. On the walk back, nothing was said about what had happened. Then at dinner he described the grassy spot he had visited in the dunes. He gave it the name Urad Hasil, which means where wishes are fulfilled, and said that for all who pray there, their wishes will be granted.
Perhaps some clue to his experience in the dunes can be found in what seems to be the last talk he gave at the summer school. The topic he spoke about was the work of the spiritual hierarchy. This would have been the only talk he gave on this subject at this summer school. Here is an excerpt from that talk.
It has never been necessary for any of the members of the hierarchy to claim, especially for the reason that in this world of falsehood there are false claims, and even the real claims in the worldly life are no more true than false. The holders of these offices can serve the purpose better by being silent than by announcing themselves such and such. When every office in the world brings to man a certain amount of vanity, and as vanity is the greatest enemy of spiritual people, and as there is jealousy of human nature always at work, the office has always been concealed by the spiritual office holders, except by the teachers who had to give the message of God to people and teach them. And how many in the world would not believe unless they knew that he was the office bearer from God? The teachers have their life as the example of their office. Except for that, they had no other evidence. The teacher's position is more delicate than that of the master or saint, because he must claim and be among people. And being among people is as a bird of a different forest, having arrived in a strange land, and all other birds finding him different from them, wish to fight him, torture him, and wish to kill him. That has been the condition of the Prophet in all times, and the same will always be. The last one left a warning for the coming one, which was this, that the prophecy was sealed. He did not mean by this that the work of the Spirit of Guidance was sealed. It was a clue to the successor, and there the claim was sealed, that the work may be done without a claim. And it is the work that is done that should prove its genuineness instead of a claim.
Four years later, Hazrat Inayat Khan returned to India after 16 years of traveling widely and spreading the message of God in the West. After 6 months in India, he died of pneumonia. He was succeeded in the leadership of the Sufi movement by his brother, Maheboob Khan. A person whom one knew in life casually can come alive with great vividness in the remembrances shared at a memorial service. Here are some words spoken about Shaikh-ul-Masheikh Mahmood Khan at his memorial service in 1948. Zuleika van Ingen said of him, "The wise man, Pir-o-Murshid, has called you. The place of the pearl is not on the market. The pearl is rare and veils its beauty. So it was with your being. It did not advertise itself with a loud voice, but it let itself be discovered by whomsoever sought you. Sobriety, humility, and sincerity adorned your being. Like a real mystic, you did not only speak of the inner life, you were the inner life, and that gave to your personality that sphere of light, silence, and peace we always took with us when we had been in your presence." The national representative of Sweden, Karima Engström, said, "Who was he? If you had asked him, his answer would have been modest. I saw him as a man walking steadily on the raging waves of the ocean of life, and helping others not to sink. And to this work he put himself passionately, forgetful of his own comfort and pleasure. Remember that nothing on earth can give such a happiness as work in the service of God." These words, spoken with great conviction, stay engraved on my mind. For those who had the privilege to work under his guidance, He cared in a wonderful way in order to make their work easy. He saw your difficulties long before you had noticed them yourself, and did everything possible to help you, even with the sacrifice of his own desires. And how much did he not do for harmony's sake? If only we try to understand, we will surely find a deep wisdom in all his actions. Maheboob was born 5 years after his brother Inayat. He was the favorite son of his musician father, Sheikh Rahmat Khan. Rahmat was very strict with himself and with his children. His manner was simple and dignified. He taught his sons, especially Maheboob, to control their emotions and hide their feelings. Maheboob learned to cover his gentle and sensitive nature with a layer of dignified reserve.
Yes, and then, you know, the extraordinary thing is because he was also educated in what you call that moral style, the moral style of, and that included that element of reserve. You find the same in Murshid's texts, that anything that is really precious, that is really worthwhile, that's really beautiful, is subtle and is coarsened when expressed, so don't express it. And that had been very much also that tradition he got from his father Rahmat Khan, and that was very much akin to his nature. So he was bred in that, as I already said, in a sense contrary to Inayat Khan. Then Inayat Khan left Baroda in 1902. Of course he returned for visits, but he never lived there after 1992 in a kind of permanent way, whereas Maheboob Khan and Muhammad Ali Khan continued living there up till 1910, and so were exposed for 8 more years to that modernizing influence of Dr. Alauddin Khan Pathan, the second maternal uncle, second son of Mullah Bakhsh. And of course he was a modernist. He had studied in England, and of course he also had learned something of the British attitude, you know, of reserve, of the stiff upper lip, etc. So in a sense, he, from both sides, from his father and from his uncle, he had acquired a certain kind of way of, of being and of behaving. And but now the charming thing was that in private circles, either in personal interviews or in a circle of Murids with whom he really had a kind of personal relationship, he was, on the contrary, extremely lively, extremely witty, and as a person also in his family life and also towards his friends and his murid, was an extremely warm-hearted person. But exactly because he attached so much value to his feelings and to his warmth of heart, exactly therefore he would not express them in anything he considered public. You see, the distinction between the public and the private was very, very marked in him.
He grew up in the world of music and musicians. He was a serious student both of Indian and Western music. When Inayat left Baroda to perform his music throughout India, Maheboob took Inayat's place as music professor at the Gayanshala, the music school established by his famous grandfather, Mullah Bakhsh. Maheboob's voice was acclaimed as extraordinarily beautiful. Inayat Khan said of his voice, "I have never heard, if I were to give my candid opinion, such a voice, saturated with sweetness and rich with beauty, with piercing quality, in the eastern or western part of the world all my life. And his singing often reminded me of the voice of my grandfather, Mullah Bakhsh, and yet Maheboob's voice seemed to me even superior." When he wanted to listen to him, Inayat had to hide while Maheboob was singing. In the West, Maheboob had to overcome his shyness to perform before audiences that had little understanding of the music he loved. Nevertheless, in the 1920s, Maheboob and his brother Musharaff became well known in Europe. Maheboob was also a composer. He wrote Indian songs and then transposed them to a Western style, for Western instruments and harmonies. Some of his most beautiful songs are settings of the words of Inayat Khan from the Gayan, Vadan, and Nirtan, a collection of inspired aphorisms, prayers, and poems of great mystical depth. Here is an example sung by his cousin, Ali Khan.
Let the wish become my desire, let thy will become my deed, let thy word become my speech, beloved, and let thy love become my creed. Let my plant bring forth thy flowers, let my fruits produce thy seed, let my heart become thy lute, beloved, all my body thy flute of reed.
Maheboob felt that these musical meditations on some of the most profound teachings of Inayat Khan were his most important contribution to the work of the message. When Inayat Khan died unexpectedly at the age of 44, there was confusion about who should succeed him as head of the Sufi movement. Maheboob was a natural choice, but he himself had doubts. How could anyone presume to step into the role of representative general, which still resounded with the majesty and holy atmosphere of Inayat Khan? There were indications that Inayat Khan had chosen Maheboob to succeed him. During a rehearsal for the ceremony of laying the foundation stone for the Universelle on Hejrat Day 1926, someone was needed to take the role of Hazrat Inayat Khan. Murshida Saintbury Green was in charge and asked Maheboob to stand in. Later, Inayat Khan told her, "You have done well." As you watch this movie, can you imagine Maheboob walking in his brother's footsteps, as he was later to do as head of the Sufi movement? In her last meeting with Inayat Khan before he left for India, Murshida Sophia had this exchange with him.
I went into Murshid's presence. He was far away. He hardly knew me, first of all. He motioned to me to sit on the divan. Presently he said to me, "You scarcely know Maheboob Khan." I replied, "No, Murshid, I know the others much better." Then he looked far out of the window. For a long time we were silent. Then again he said, "You scarcely know Maheboob Khan." I said, "No, Murshid." And he again looked out of the window. And then he arose, and I arose too, and he said to me, "You scarcely know Maheboob Khan." And I said, "No, Murshid." And he said, "You will find him very deep." And that and his blessing were the last earthly words he spoke to me. From that moment on, I cannot wonder, but have realized that it was a designation of Murshid's successor given to me.
Maheboob held the position of representative general of the Sufi movement for more than 20 years, longer than anyone who succeeded him. His style as a leader was reserved, retiring, and shy, as well as extremely tactful and considerate.
He followed up that insight of Murshids in his own mode of Sufi leadership. That is, for him, the meditative dimension was by far the dominant, the main emphasis of his responsibility to Murshid Sufism. And for all the other things, he was very fortunate in having a number of people to whom he could delegate things. Murshid Ali Khan, who did very often the work in traveling around the centers, very much in demand for his music, for his singing, very much in demand for his healing. Geneva, the organization, it was Murshid Talawa who was in charge there with a number of very capable people as well. And Mr. Van Otten was there Mr. Juira was there, numbers of others. So that worked fairly well. So, yes, for him, he could, not exclusively, naturally not, but to a very full extent, he could concentrate on that mystical dimension of Sufism, which he felt was its authenticity and which ought to be represented as markedly as possible in Sufism, Murshid Sufism. And so then, that meditation, that mystical level of consciousness was really his great fulfillment. So, that mysticism he practiced every day, and when Murshid Ali Khan was not traveling or had no appointments elsewhere, he would join there, and I must say it was a wonderful experience which one could observe only indirectly, because all the curtains were closed, and so nobody was allowed there, the doors were locked, and only now and then you heard a certain murmuring, a certain sounds coming up of certain practices, exercises or meditations being done with voice. At other times there was complete silence, but the atmosphere was so extraordinarily strong, that sense of a kind of elevated serenity in that room, and really permeating the whole house, that it struck not only Murids who loved to come there and just sit there quietly, even many years after their own lifetimes, but even non-Murids, non-Sufis felt there was something very special, very particular atmosphere in this house. And then non-Sufi people who didn't know them thought it must in one way or another be connected with these two Oriental gentlemen there. So there was something very special. And of course, that meditative session was very fixed. Every day that went from 10 to 12 in the morning. Then either in the late morning or the early afternoon they would have their visitors, the leaders of centers, but also individual Murids used to come to them for interviews. Then after 4 o'clock, around 5 o'clock, they would have another hour of meditation. And then again in the evening between 8 and 10. So 10 to 12 in the morning, 1 hour around 5 in the afternoon, and again in the evening 8 to 10. But on the other hand, of course, every moment not occupied either with, having an interview with Murids or a discussion with other Sufi representatives, or not occupied in any kind of conversation or writing letters or whatever. All the time, a certain meditative routine simply went on. Very often it happened that you would address Shaikh-ul-Masheikh and ask him something or make a remark to him, and then you just saw that he just, would quickly end that inward meditation that was going on there before he would really listen to you and answer. So that was something which otherwise you would not really notice. Maybe occasionally a bit of absent-mindedness, but that goes with meditation anyway. Once it happened during the war, when food supplies were extremely short and we had great difficulty in having anything to eat at all. But thanks to the Dutch linkage, pre-war linkage with Indonesia, you had all kinds of Indonesian things. So people of Oriental descent did get a ration of rice, which other people didn't get. And you had these sambals, these little pots with that hot sambal, how do you call it, the spice. And so once we were sitting on the table with hardly anything to eat, but anything, whatever was there, and then my father asked for that little bottle of spice. And everybody started looking and couldn't find it in the table. No, they looked in the cupboard. It was not to be found. Until at last he found it. He already had it in his hand, sitting just there looking there. And so my father said, well, you see, this is exactly the secret of God. We are looking for him everywhere. Inside we don't. Yeah.
Maheboob died unexpectedly in 1948. Having looked at many aspects of this remarkable man, we close with words spoken about him at his memorial service by then Pirzadeh Vilayat. The admiration and appreciation of devotees and friends is an inadequate tribute to one who, needing the peace of retirement by virtue of his fine and sensitive soul, sacrificed this peace for the responsibility of leadership of an organization. Those who had known Shaikh-ul-Masheikh's gentle, unassuming radiance and felt the fragrance of the artist and mystic as he sheltered within the orbit of the mighty aura of the Master, could not at first imagine that he would emerge out of this serenity into the limelight of contention. And there was the moment when, for the sake of cohesion, the mystic had to affirm himself as leader, so that the organization might withstand the test of time. No one will ever know the cost of this soul being spurred into action. Shaikh-ul-Masheikh cared little for spectacular displays of enthusiasm for the notion of a message not altogether encompassed, or for the number of persons to whom some intimation of the nature of the message might have been given, but rather for the few real devotees for whom the sacred relationship meant everything. Only in the intimacy of the small circle did he unveil the reserve and give ungrudgingly of his soul. Few only had the privilege of experiencing this disclosure of something so fine and beautiful as to defy description. The few who really knew him loved him for the beauty within. On Hijrat Day 1926, Ali Khan, along with another man, lifted the universal foundation stone into place. Perhaps this was symbolic of the service he would one day render as guardian of the message. It testifies to his great strength, not only physical strength, but strength of will and firmness. Some would later call it sternness. To him what was all important was to build a reliable and solid foundation for the sacred temple of the prophetic transmission of the Master, and this required an uncompromising purity. Where Maheboob was prone to compromise and tolerance of even openly hostile opponents, Ali Khan demanded unswerving commitment and loyalty to what he believed to be the way and the truth of the Master's teaching. The strength of his conviction was communicated in speech that was direct and carried an intensity of feeling. As you can hear in this address from 1955, his heart was deeply moved by the living presence of the message and the Master.
Murshids, thanks you most heartily. That you are all standing around him, by him, in the service of Sufi divine cause. And also Murshids is ever with you, with his goodwill. for your life's happiness. That you may become rich in the work of the Sufi, divine wisdom, the universal wisdom. We are bound together with our mind, heart and soul, and the spirit.
Who was this brother, so different from both Maheboob and Musharaff Khan? Actually, he was not a brother by birth. He was a cousin. His grandmother was the sister of Karimbaksh, the grandfather of Hazrat Inayat Khan. He was 2 years older than Inayat Khan. As children, they were playmates. However, they had very different upbringings. Ali Khan spent his first 5 years in the house of Karimbaksh, but when his parents both died, he moved in with his maternal grandparents and received a strict Muslim education. There, he says, he was spoiled by loving aunts, who catered to his love of sweets, and he was sometimes quite fat. He was, however, trained in wrestling and grew very strong. At the age of 15, he returned to Baroda and again lived in the house of Karimbaksh. There he received an unusually rigorous training in healing. Later he became known throughout the Sufi movement for his great gifts as a healer. No doubt he also saw his work on a larger scale as a purification and healing of the transmission left behind by his predecessors. He attributed his ability to heal to blessings he had received from many enlightened souls. In an interview he said, "From my Murshid in India I received a blessing and the sacred permission to practice healing. The guidance of my Murshid in India and my contact with him and his example were a constant source of enlightenment to my body and heart and soul. And I have found many friends in the West whose support and sympathy have assisted me in carrying on the work of service to God and humanity. For me it is difficult to speak of my work. Through practice and intuition and through touch, I feel the condition of the patient." There are many stories of healing, small and large, that he performed for members of the Sufi movement. In some cases he healed patients who doctors thought to be incurable. Some patients were treated by massage. As a wrestler and a very strong man, Ali Khan gave a massage that was hard to bear.
When I was young, about 11 years, my parents brought me to him for this treatment. It was not called massage, it was treatment. I needed it, I was not so strong physically, and he gave me some of these treatments. It was done with most of your clothes on, not the jacket, but everything else, while taking away a belt. And it was a very powerful kind of massage, often almost unbearable. Curious things that he did. He did this, made your neck crack by the movement. He put his thumbs in your eyes and pushed a little bit. The nose, everything, and of course the back very much. So it was not so easy to bear that, but afterwards you felt as reborn, and it made me very much stronger. After those treatments, I could wrestle with any other boy from the class. So after that, no question of. And my health was better. So that was really a remarkable experience. And so many people experienced that. There were many healing stories. And always, when afterwards people came to thank him, he would say, no, no. Thank God. That was the secret. He didn't think that he was healing. He was a channel that the divine healing power, through his breath, would come. That was the secret of it. And you read in Murshid Inayat Khan's book on health also, that only real spiritual healing can be given in that consciousness.
Ali Khan was trained in the Gayanshala of Karimbaksh, where he learned to play the veena and other Indian instruments. Later he learned about Western music from Alauddin Pathan, Karimbaksh's youngest son, who had studied Western music in London and on the continent. In the West, Ali Khan was trained as an opera singer by the famous soprano Madame Nevada.
Trees of value seed shall crowd into a shade.
The Aga Khan took an interest in him and offered to promote his career, a fabulous opportunity. But Ali Khan refused to leave his teacher. His brothers felt that he had lost the chance of a lifetime. Nevertheless, he traveled widely in Europe and was well received wherever he went. While Maheboob, as leader of the Sufi movement, sought harmony and quietly endured opposition which was sometimes harsh, Ali Khan took a definite stand and demanded loyalty. Some saw him as authoritarian and rebelled against him. Others appreciated the clarity with which he upheld the principles he believed in. He saw the hierarchy of the Sufi movement as an organism whose function is to bring through the guidance from God and protect it from the distortions of the nafs. He was ever on guard to protect what was entrusted to him from the encroachment of the nafs, and this took the form of uncompromising sternness. At the same time, he maintained great humility and a warm sense of humor.
His purity expressed itself also in very, very extreme ways, you could say, but always in a humoristic way. For once, when we had been there, when I was there, we would have lunch together. Suhrawardi would also come. And he brought a nice cake, which we could take as dessert. So that cake was cut up, and we started to eat, and then Ali Khan said, "Is there a little rum in it?" "Yes, Murshid, I think so." "Then throw it out of the window." And there it went. So, his purity together with his humor.
His atmosphere was peaceful and conveyed a powerful feeling of divine presence.
What I admired so much in him was that you felt a realization. He was not a man of many words. When you were with him, you felt he was there in a very deep way. And also that's another aspect of the same thing, that he was in very close contact with the Divine Spirit, with God. He sometimes talked about being face to face with God. And that was not a phrase. That was how he experienced it. And that was really the main thing.
Those who heard Ali Khan singing found that his voice had a healing power. His singing created an atmosphere of intense devotion, of purity and sacredness, that moved the hearts of audiences, even those who knew little of mysticism.
Extraordinary thing about Pir-o-Murshid Ali Khan is he had such a powerful voice that was just absolutely incredible. But when he spoke, he had the softest voice that you could ever imagine. He could make a tremendous transition between that powerful and that very, very Jalal voice. When Pir-o-Murshid Ali Khan sang, most of the ladies were crying. They could not keep their tears. It wasn't possible. And I must say, later when we heard all these different famous singers, we still always feel deep in our hearts that the voice of Pir-o-Murshid Ali Khan was irreplaceable. And perhaps the reason is because it was a combination of extraordinary voice, yes, but also spiritual vibrations and the very extraordinary development of his breathing abilities. And when we hear recordings of the voice of Pir-o-Murshid Ali Khan, as to myself, I always shed tears. Not only because that voice relates to very precious memories, but because of what that voice is really communicating. It's communicating power and tenderness at the same time.
Ali Khan filled the role of Representative General in Pir-o-Murshid for 10 years until his death in 1958. He was succeeded by the youngest of the brothers, Musharaff Khan.
What I may not see, let me not see. What I may not hear, let me not hear. What I may not know, I ask not to know. Beloved, I am contented with both thy speech and thy silence.
Musharaff Khan was a storyteller. During the time of his leadership of the Sufi movement, he told many stories which were compiled into a book called Pages in the Life of a Sufi. Here is a story he told about a song taught to him by Hazrat Inayat Khan. After telling the story, he sings the song.
As a young student, I have been taught to learn one song of Hazrat Inayat Khan, he had composed this song at the age of 15 years in Hindi language. You know that we have many different languages in India. So many creeds, so many languages. So it was in the Hindi language. At present, this Hindi language has become the national language for India. As you know, the Hazrat Inayat Khan was most fond of composing poems. That was also his most favorite. He loved the poems. Sometimes his parents were anxious that by so much indulging in making the poems, he might become ascetic. That was their fear. And therefore sometimes they hinted about it. They did not wish that he must go on indulging in making the poems. Finally they understood that he is born as a poet, as he was born as a great musician and a mystic. All these qualities is as if inborn in him. That's a gift which he received from above. And this poem goes it's very short poems, but think of this, that at the age of 15 years, such a subtle thoughts, such a deep thoughts, which he is expressing in that age. That's remarkable to notice. In Hindi it is, I will repeat first, Das Jagadish Sada Ham hai, Sakal Samaj Mahi Brahma hai, Asatya Sab Dekhat Hi Gam hai, Inayat Sab Vyartha Sharma hai. Das Jagadish Sada Ham hai, that means I am a servant or a slave of the Lord who is the Lord of the whole universe. Now just imagine, in that age, that expression, I am a servant of the Lord of the One, the Lord of the whole universe. Sada Hama hai, Sakal Samaj Mahi Brahma hai. And I am witnessing his manifestation in everything, in all. He is manifesting. He is radiating. His light is all pervading. Sakal Samaj Mahi Brahma hai, Asatya Sab Dekhat Hi Gam hai. And he says, knowing in the outer life untruth, falsehood, gives me the pain and grief. Then the last sentence he says, Asatya Sab Dekhat Hi Gam hai, Inayat Sab Vyartha Sharma hai. O Inayat, the outer strife of this life is vain. Think of deeply. Awake yourself from the slumber of this life, because the outer effort of this life is useless, is vain. This is the Hindi. This reminded me, and I thought that I will take this opportunity to explain to you at the age of the 15 how our Murshid had been inspired. Das Jagadish Sada Ham hai, Das Jagadish Sada Ham hai, सकल समाज माही ब्रह्म है, असत्य सब देखत ही गम है, इनायत सब व्यर्थ व्यर्थ श्रम है, दास जगदीश सदा हम है, दास जगदीश सदा हम है, सकल समाज माही ब्रह्म है, असत्य सब देखत ही गम है, इनायत सब व्यर्थ व्यर्थ श्रम है.
Musharaff was well loved for his friendliness and his outgoing personality. His warmth is illustrated in this story from Pir-o-Murshid Hidayat's childhood.
I personally loved him very much because when I was a little boy, I was very naughty. And often our father brought us together just there underneath the staircases and asked us to confess whatever naughtiness we had done, and we would be offered to choose a punishment, one of the punishments, which one of the many punishments which were on the list and which were presented to us with the possibility of choosing out of those punishments which one we thought corresponded best to the type of naughtiness. Among these punishments, there were such punishments such as saying the prayers, for instance, or wazifas 100 times, auto-suggestion sentences. For instance, I am a good boy, I'm a good boy, I'm a good boy. And others such as standing in the corner for a certain amount of time, or keeping silence for a part of the day. Many other of those types of punishments. But our father never gave those punishments, but he asked Musharaff Khan to make sure that we accomplish the chosen punishment. So after that meeting, our uncle, his name, we called him Chacha, which means uncle, took us secretly in a corner and said, well, I'm sure you'll be a good boy from here on, so you don't have to do that punishment.
Of the three brothers, Musharaff reminded the Murids most of Hazrat Inayat Khan. It was in his bearing and in his language, as well as in the warmth of his personality.
Musharaff Khan, in the sense that's remarkable, he was, I think, closest to Inayat Khan, and many Sufis always become angry with me if I say that, because Inayat Khan ought to be incomparable. But I say, well, at a very, very different level indeed. Not even at the level of the other two brothers. But at the same time, at the very basic level, he still reproduced many of the characteristics of Inayat Khan, which Maheboob Khan and Musharaff Ali Khan did not. For instance, he had that kind of poetic sense, he had that kind of, extrovert kind of enthusiasm, he had also that kind of emphasis of saying things, sometimes also a kind of one-sided, well, he could have the as kind of one-sidedness about which Musharaff Khan did not have. If he had it, he would qualify it in another way, that you see in his lectures. But, his mode of speech, for instance. After the war, for quite a few years, he lived with us also at The Hague, before he went to after his marriage, a number of years when he became leader of the Sufis, he lived somewhere else. But for a number of years he lived with us there. And so I noticed that his mode of speech, his mode of expression himself, his mode of alluding to things, made a life of what you found in Musharaff Inayat Khan's texts. So Musharaff Inayat Khan's texts, I could hear them, since in Musharaff Khan spoke in those same terms, in that same kind of mode of expression, using even the same words, etc. So it was very recognizable.
Musharaff was well aware of his royal inheritance from the line of Tipu Sultan.
Another picture which I would like to give is his awareness of being a descendant of the great Tipu Sultan, who was one of the greatest reformers in India, and whose example our uncle was very enthusiastic in following, such as dignity and behavior and consciousness of one's responsibilities. And that is what, of course, helped so much to give the picture of well, I don't like putting it in this way, but I have to, of majestic royalty, which was so typical of the four brothers. And which Pir-o-Murshid Musharaff Khan, who was the last survivor, kept alive after the passing of his brothers. And this is also something that did impress very much the Murids in those days, because they were so accustomed to the majestic characteristics of Hazrat Inayat Khan, and they were so happy to find that back again in Pir-o-Murshid Musharaff Khan.
Though he was best known for his outgoing personality and his skill as a storyteller, Musharaff was also a mystic. Like Maheboob and Ali Khan, his atmosphere in meditation was powerful.
Another very precious memory is when sitting in the main room at the Barnstraat, where my uncle was doing the zikr. And when he did the zikr, it wasn't just 100 beats or 101. It was a half an hour or 3/4 of an hour. And he did it with such tremendous power, the whole house was resonating. I still hear that in my ears and in my heart.
Musharaff led the Sufi movement for 9 years. His wife, Shahzadi, was a true partner in his work. Her energetic spirit attracted many young Murids. She became a powerful spiritual presence and continued her influence after his death in 1967. 3 brothers, each brought something unique to their stewardship of the treasury left by Hazrat Inayat Khan, and together they somehow complemented each other. They brought an integrity and a continuity to the continued life of the Sufi movement and the legacy of the message.
So, yes, each of them had a very pronounced character of their own, and it all fitted together marvelously. There was, a kind of harmonious mosaic of very different characters who just together made one mosaic picture in a beautiful way.
You are my life, it is in you that I live. From you I borrow life, and you do I give. Oh, my soul. but I found you at last. You are my life, it is in you that I live. From you I borrow life, and you do I give. Oh, my soul and spirit, you I adore. I live in you, so do I live.